we're going to have to disagree on that. But thank you very much indeed for your text nonetheless. Let's talk politics and whether Keir Starmer is the heir to Blair, because he was interviewed by Tony Blair recently, and there are many questions as to after their first public appearance, Sir Tony Blair turned to Sir Keir Starmer and told him the country would be in good hands if he won the next general election. But how much influence does Tony Blair have on Keir Starmer? Let's talk to Patrick Timms. He is the editor of the Wolves of Westminster website. Patrick, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. What do you make of this? Where do you think Tony Blair kind of fits in to Keir Starmer's leadership?
Well, okay, so there's a couple of things I want to say about this. The first one is to say that I remember being in the very same studio where you are right now, about this time last year, for the last silly season story, which was Gordon Brown, the new leader of the opposition. So let's just briefly explain.
I don't think he was then. I don't think he is now.
No, of course he's not. Now, the story was just about the fact that he had a direct sort of phone line into Sir Keir Starmer's office. And let's just briefly explain for viewers what silly season is. So silly season is when all of the politicians head off. There are less polite versions of that sentence. And the journalists get in the summer, and the journalists get very, very bored, and various stories of this nature come out. So, and I was saying at the time, no, he's not been an MP for 7 years or 8 years now. He's not the leader of the opposition. Okay, so the second thing to say is, when I look at this story, I think to myself, whose ego is being stroked here, right? Because it's not Sir Keir Starmer's, I don't think. Now, you have Sir Tony Blair here, who obviously was PM for 10 years, but he's not been PM for
although
in
Labour's thoughts and the thoughts of many, many people I know who work for the Labour Party, you know, he is nonetheless someone who won 3 elections and is, from Keir Starmer's perspective, I'm sure being compared to Tony Blair isn't a bad thing.
Well, I don't know. I should have thought that if I were leading a party, I should want it to be my stamp of leadership, if you see what I mean.
I totally say that, yeah.
I should. It seems to me that this interview, this event, which I believe had something to do with the TBI, the Tony Blair Institute, that really, I think it's Sir Tony's ego that's being stroked here. At the end of the day, he's feeling as though he can still, after 16 years, he can still exert that influence of saying, okay, I'm going to anoint you as my now preferred successor. And you think, well, hang on.
Although there is there not a sort of major issue on which they disagree? This net zero idea, actually, that the Conservatives, Labour and the Lib Dems have committed to. And Tony Blair has said that actually it's probably unachievable and may not be desirable. So they don't agree on everything.
No, they certainly don't agree on everything. But I think what's interesting is, because if you actually look, obviously I read the story in the Times, and you have Starmer praising the TBI for its work as the very best in public policy innovation. Now, it's interesting to think about who is really scratching whose back here. I think that's a very interesting question. Whether or not Sir Keir Starmer is the heir to Sir Tony Blair, well, we don't know, do we? That's what we're going to find out next year. But what's most interesting to me is the way in which this has come about. So obviously, Sir Tony Blair, he was not going to anoint Jeremy Corbyn.
No, that wasn't going to happen.
Leader of the Labour Party. No. And he didn't really anoint Ed Miliband either. Now, of course, we also have to look at the polls and the fact that, obviously, so now, as of only a year and a bit ago, Labour is in the lead. So do we think that maybe what Sir Tony is doing here is he's saying, right, we as a party might actually be about to get back into power at some point. So what I'm going to do is throw my weight behind the current leader, who is at least a lot more centrist than the last one, maybe a bit more third way sort of thing. Another thing to mention is that, Sir Keir is, there is a bit of a vacuum of ideas around him. And another thing that's mentioned in the story is that it may be that an incoming Labour administration would lean quite heavily on ideas and policy suggestions from the Tony Blair Institute. So
there are certainly quite a few Blairite characters around Keir Starmer as well. So sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
I was just going to finish by saying, well, do we reckon that perhaps Sir Tony is now choosing the traditional alternative to power in politics, which is, of course, influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick, some really good points there. Patrick Timms there, editor of Wolves of Westminster. Thank you very much indeed for that. Sheila has given me a call on 0344 499 1000 in regard to rescue animals. Sheila,